Hello everyone, and welcome to game number 3 in our best of 5 series between Cubit32 Veivi and Saberman Gaming Gameslayer, who has put his GSG tag back on. I want to point out he's apparently feeling a bit more confident at the moment. And that is well deserved, because Gameslayer and Saberman took a hard-fought game number 2 away from Cubit32 and Veivi, the actual first team in this tournament to not go through a shutout after losing that first game. So that is definitely worth paying attention to. An interesting found location from Saberman, once again valuing those adjacency bonuses more than anything else. I think I actually like Veivi's found better. It's not too much later than Saberman's found, but once again, it has that adjacent water available. Magnetic storms are around, so that is very important this game. And on top of that, it has this high iron tile. So it might end up with some weaker adjacency bonuses at the end of the day, but with this high iron tile, I think that's actually going to be really, really important as we move through this game. And it's only very, very slightly weaker adjacency for the time being. So that's very interesting to see. Alright, everybody moving into more steel mills. It does look like Veivi beat Saberman to the punch there in terms of steel, so I'm very concerned about Saberman and where his advantage actually lies this game. Although Gameslayer was the first one to get to HQ level 2, and wow, we can see, let's actually take a look at our expansives here. We can see that Gameslayer has 2 adjacent geotherms and 2 adjacent aluminum mines, and that is definitely going to be a big deal this game. Like, he can transition that aluminum later if he needs to. Those geotherms are going to be absolutely fantastic if he picks up superconductor. I think there's still plenty of geotherm left on the map for Cubit. There were at least 3 that we saw. Man, these combo tiles just sitting out here completely unused in a 2v2. That's terribly amusing to me. So, Cubit has at least 3 geotherms as well, up against Saberman's 3 geotherms. I'm a bit surprised, sorry, against Gameslayer's 3 geotherms. I'm a bit surprised Gameslayer went for 3 of them, considering he did have 2 that had the potential to pick up that superconductor, but it looks as though he just values having that raw power right away enough. And another big advantage over to Gameslayer based on where he's found it is, first of all, he can move into iron if it looks ridiculously valuable. Second, not only are these geotherms adjacent, but that means they're very, very close to him, as is this 3rd geotherm location he's managed to pick up. So his geotherms are coming online a lot faster than Cubit's are, which had to fly across the map and get situated, and it's just creating a bit more of an awkward situation. Which does mean Gameslayer is just a bit faster the punch to that power than he might have been. It looks like he was possibly even later to start constructing the geotherms. Maybe a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to that steel production, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't actually enough to punish him in any way. And he was the one to get that power online first. Regardless of that, things are about even at this point, 3 geotherms apiece. So what it comes down to is that Saberman and Gameslayer have a slight upgrade advantage at this point. Not very long at all. This is a very, very, very close game. And I think what we're going to see start turning it is actually going to be these scientific found locations. Steel has managed to stay very high this game, unlike the last one where it dropped to $4. Everybody's maybe a bit more properly using their resources and spreading out their production, including pulling in plenty of aluminum, which is keeping that steel price elevated. Very, very important. I don't know what claim just got taken away. Could have easily been something like carbon, something like, not silicon probably, maybe a pleasure dome location is what it could have been. Pleasure domes are looking pretty awkward this game, with like one occupied building here, one here, one here. I don't even know. I mean, this spot probably will work out for Cubit, but it is a little bit of a risk.
3,000.
Yep, 3,000. All right, that's fine.
4,000.
I do like this spot for Cubit, though. I think it is actually a pretty good spot. Cubit's managed to get to HQ level 4 already. That's quite impressive, having moved into glass and food. Now he's just trying to get some more water and going ahead and hopping into that patent office. And with a freeze, it's a very important EMP on almost all of Gameslayer's stuff. They may start having trouble keeping up at this point. We're going to need to see some aggressive black market out of them as well. Plenty of resources, it looks like, available for Gameslayer. He should be able to push to an upgrade before too terribly long. But things are just looking a little bit awkward, and I think this quick upgrade, I honestly think, comes down to the fact that this food is still in the air instead of being in the hands of Gameslayer to actually push. However, Gameslayer did get a patent office online. It is goon squatted. He got there first. There is, in fact, a freeze onto Cubit's patent office, so that isn't coming up anytime soon. That's a very important power surge that went down on this patent office and then expanded outward. And Gameslayer is the first one to it, and he's already got Superconductor rolling on out. That freeze is so long that he will also secure virtual reality before Cubit gets anything done. Cubit even sees it. He just scraps out of the office. He says, never mind. Not gonna bother. And that means that the patents will once again be in favor of Gameslayer. However, they did sacrifice an upgrade advantage in order to make that happen. Also worth noting is that Saberman has gone ahead and expanded up to HQ level 4, which is different from what we've seen in any of these other expansive scientific combos. Usually the scientist sits back on 3, and he's just basically sitting there feeding the expansive player at that point, not getting to actually do a whole lot himself. But Saberman went ahead and took that 4th upgrade, and he's used that to get a hold of some iron and put a chem lab down. No adjacency for that chem lab yet, but it's still doing a good job making some money, considering fuel is down at $8. It's definitely going to want some friends before too terribly long. No carbon under it, though, to really help out and keep that production steady. Another EMP raining down onto Gameslayer. You can see that kind of EMP resistance kicking in for him, though. It's not going to be the end of his world. It does suck. Much rather be getting this $90 per second over here than $90 per second over there, but regardless, he's still in a pretty good spot. Speaking of good spots, Cubit with no debt, a pleasure dome down. I love these 2 pleasure domes. Oh, that's ridiculous. Oh man, he just doesn't want that expanding at all and giving Cubit those adjacency bonuses. Oh, nice little freeze though. That's going to keep those offline for a bit longer. Even with the virtual reality, not going to be getting anything done with it anytime soon. Suddenly, things are swinging back in the Saberman Gameslayer direction. I think committing to this patent office at 3 was probably the right call. On top of that, they played it very, very safe. Instead of getting aggressive, all they did was say, okay, we are going to go ahead, get this patent office down, get it goon squatted before we try and do anything with it. We're just going to place it, goon squat it, and then we're going to wait. We're going to make sure we freeze out your patent office, and then we're just going to pick up the tech that we need at that point. Cubit has moved into his own patent office. By now, he's in fact working on perpetual motion. Probably a good idea if you want to run with the hacker array and the pleasure dome and other buildings of that sort. Very, very high power consumers. It also just helps keep that power price down if you think your opponent has committed too heavily to power or has an advantage over you with it. Here we go, though. Stock is starting to get interesting. Both teams deciding to get aggressive against the other scientist rather than defending themselves. And this is where I'm concerned about Saberman and Gameslayer still. One advantage of leaving that scientist down on HQ level 4 or HQ level 3 is if you're planning for him to die, well then he can just die and your opponent has a level 3 scientific headquarters. Not too much of a loss, but if you're not planning to just die and you go ahead and upgrade and try and keep him in the game, it's very important to do that because at that point you're giving away an HQ level 4 headquarters. And that is a very, very, very big difference. On top of that, looks like Cubit is the one successfully making the money this game, despite Saberman's significantly higher stock price. He is the one who has pulled forward and managed to actually get 7 stocks secured already. Still a little ways to go before he finishes it off, but not too far. Only 120,000 about needed. Let's see. Hack arrays are working away. We can pay attention and see that there's a chemical shortage coming in favor of Cubit. Whereas Gameslayer, he is after a glass shortage. Both of them just trying to find their little niche to sit in for now. I'm a little concerned about Cubit. He has an awful lot of chemical production down. Which is nice because chemicals are valuable, but it might knock that price down a bit more rapidly than he would like, even with all these patent offices staying active. Definitely worth paying attention to the fact that Veivi is down in that D-level debt. He has once again scrapped out a lot of his buildings, trying to give away as little as possible. But that means that Gameslayer does have the option of just sitting there. it's not like Veivi's going anywhere, and if he's not doing anything to help out, then why bother purchasing him if he's not going to actually give you something in the process? If Veivi just wants to sit there while he's not throwing out black market effects, all right, they choose to go for it anyway. But realistically, if Veivi... Oh, man, and actually the steel came back online that time. That is what's supposed to happen. You're not supposed to be able to spite scrap all your stuff like they tried to. So that is good to see, at least. Oh, man, we've ended up on an interesting little observer area. There we go. Back to actually looking at the players like we want to. So the buildings came back online like they're supposed to. You can't just do that, guys. It's just, you know, game's gonna catch you and be like, hey, you know what? You know what? Maybe not. Just maybe not. So that's good to see. He should have actually built those iron mines up, at least put something there if he wanted there to be like a weaker permanent tile in that location. Good to see. Okay. This means that for the moment, Gameslayer and Saberman, it looks like have an advantage. Cubit, rather than pushing for the kill, he elected to move into Offworld markets first, is what it seems. However, Gameslayer does have an Offworld market down for himself. And Cubit, with just the one, it is hologrammed to look like a metal mine. Ooh. Was that an Offworld market blowing up? Yes, it was. So, however, it's getting reconstructed right away. Gameslayer apparently has plenty of resources sitting around to get that done. Everything is solidly goon squatted. No adrenaline boost this game, so it is a bit awkward to have these two buildings being adjacent to each other. But it'll probably work out. Cubit was the one to take thinking machines this game, and now he's gotten to the purchase. It looks like Cubit might have an advantage here. It's very difficult to tell exactly who's in the best position. Pleasure domes are working in favor of Gameslayer, but both of these teams mostly just trying to negate them the best that they can, with just a slight advantage on over to the to our GSG team over here because of virtual reality. No big surprise. Offworld markets are almost online for Gameslayer, not there quite yet, so Cubit's just getting these launches off quite cleanly. Launching water this game, once again, we do have a bit of a weaker Offworld going on. Probably could have launched steel, actually. Might have been a bit better to do, considering that steel is very, very cheap, and it might have kept Gameslayer off of his Offworld markets for just a little bit longer. Something to consider. But even with that Offworld advantage, Cubit does not have a significant amount of cash from that yet, relative to Gameslayer. And on top of that, Gameslayer, he's already in those two Offworlds, so the advantage is gone at this point. That temporary short-term advantage has disappeared. Gameslayer has more territory. He seems to be using all of it relatively effectively, aside from the power, which they committed to in the mid-game like they needed to in order to stay alive, so that's okay. That's okay. On top of that, Gameslayer has a lot of scientific steel down, and a lot of scientific electrolysis down, whereas Cubit, he actually doesn't have any scientific buildings down other than these farms, which can get hit by magnetic storms, very importantly. What are we looking at? Slowdown strike, and a network virus going on. That's interesting. Why does it say these are consuming no power? Does a strike take away power consumption? Or are they just not working because they don't have water? That's interesting. I don't know what's going on there. Let's watch this one and see when this expires.
We're not surprised.
I just can't see a power price attached to it, apparently. Oh, Cubit, do you have...
Stock is being bought. Off-world shipment launch.
Yeah, it looks like Cubit, so he's consuming water instead of power, which makes it a little bit weird because everything's not showing up on the tooltip exactly correctly. But Cubit, is he consuming water instead of power? What's going on here? No? He's still consuming power. Whatever. The tooltip's not helping me. Let's just leave it at that. The tooltip's not telling me about power consumption. He's not consuming no power. I'm like 80% sure of that. Regardless, we don't need to look at that anymore. What we do need to look at is the fact that Gameslayer has taken a small stock advantage at this point. He has 2 of Cubit's stock secured, and 2 of his own stock secured, so that's going to be very beneficial for him. Gameslayer does look like might be having a little bit of water trouble. Both of our players actually having some serious water trouble. They've both been launching water, I imagine, most of this time. Launch steel. Launch steel. Okay, Gameslayer is trying to launch steel, but the auto launches aren't really favoring him. Cubit is just chain launching water at this point, apparently not paying attention to the price of the Offworlds as effectively as he might like. Or maybe he's just trying to keep that water price high. I can't be sure. Thinks he's making enough water to cover it, that it'll be okay. Regardless, it looks like Cubit is in a bit of an awkward spot. Still back on 2 Offworld markets. He has not managed to push to HQ level 5 effectively just yet on his Saberman scientific headquarters. So he is not able to build that 3rd Offworld market that Gameslayer has established. Stock has evened up just a bit once again, but Gameslayer with a significant cash lead still, choosing not to expand into any more Offworlds. He is just committing to that stock that he wants to go ahead and grab up. Now, Cubit does seem to be pulling in a lot of cash on world successfully. Claim auction just going untaken. I'm not so sure about that one. Once again, it does cost cash.
Just disappointed in you.
But what would it have been? Like 4,000, maybe 6,000 cash? I think it probably would have been worth that, guys. I'm just throwing it out there. You can find buildings to make that kind of money when power's at $127 a piece. I'm just throwing it out there. Like, it's okay. But regardless, we are still in about the same spot. Like, stock is very evenly distributed at this point, but Gameslayer is still just sitting on more cold hard cash. And he should be able to use that effectively. On top of that, his stock price is just a bit higher because he has had that lead with having scientific headquarter level 5. Now he's taking an edge in actual stock count, which is more what I would have expected to see earlier. Everybody just staying aggressive, but if things stay at the status quo right now, I can easily see Gameslayer taking this one as we push on to a game number 4. On top of that, I think, and I'm going to check and make sure, Gameslayer seems to have been, yes, dynamite going off everywhere, he seems to have been a bit more effective when it comes to shortages and surpluses this game. You can see Gameslayer's thrown out 4 surpluses. Whereas Cubit, he's 2 shortages, 1 surplus. And so things are, those hacker arrays maybe sitting idle a bit too long for both players. But it does look like Gameslayer's using it a bit more effectively. And if we go to the black market, we can see that Gameslayer, he's had 10 effects. Cubit has purchased 13. But Cubits, it looks like, have been very expensive on top of that. It's very difficult to tell who's actually doing a better job with that. But at the end of the day, that's not what's most important. What's most important is the fact that Gameslayer has managed to secure 8 of Cubit's stock. Cubit only has 6 of Gameslayer's. Gameslayer still has the most money available. Gameslayer still has the most Offworlds available once he's got this one fixed on up. That dynamite being very, very important. Everybody just constantly assailing their opponent's Offworld markets. I don't think Gameslayer knows this is here, because quite frankly, a high aluminum tile looks perfectly valid at this point. Aluminum's up at $100. Who wouldn't want a high aluminum tile going on? So he likely doesn't expect that he's actually 3-2 rather than 3-1, but he probably doesn't care because it's still 3, and the most his opponent can have is 2. And he knows that for sure, so he knows with just those 3 Offworlds, he does have a lead. That was inexcusable. With aluminum up at $76 a piece, you can take a mule. Iron at $66 a piece, I don't care who you are. Take that one. Come on, guys. Power's down at $10. I don't want to hear your debt nonsense right now, even with these pleasure domes active. Ugh. Regardless, Gameslayer actually took the safe route once again, purchased 3 of his own stock. Cubit down at that too. Cubit hasn't given it up just yet, but I think we can just about call this one. I do not see the tools available to Cubit to stay alive in this game. Still back on HQ level 4. Never fixed that whatsoever right here. And when you're talking 9 to 10 for so long, 3 Offworld markets to 2, I just don't see where enough of the edge is to go ahead and take it, especially when we haven't seen anything like engineering labs come out, which I think would have been very helpful this game. Players could kind of predict we were pushing toward that long game once again. I think I would have liked to see those engineering labs come down, combined with a hacker array. to maybe get a bit more work done, considering these off-world markets were so weak. That said, fuel and water are going just fine. It does look like Cubit's being a bit more effective with his off-worlds, auto-launching water the whole time, but considering Gameslayer's off-world edge, I don't know if that's the end of the world for him. Cubit throws out the GG, and Gameslayer is going to take the win in game number 3, pushing us to 2-1 in Gameslayer and Saberman's favor as we move on into game number 4. We took a look at most of what we needed to over the course of that game. We can see entertainment revenue in favor of Gameslayer, but not by a huge amount, even with that virtual reality. The adjacency bonuses that Cubit picked up kind of compensating in a pretty significant way. Only about 70,000 behind when all was said and done. Not too bad, all things considered. Cubit, it looks like he bought a lot less resources and sold some less resources. But I think, like, this sold off-world is a pretty big difference here. Gameslayer didn't get as much more sold off-world as one might have expected there, which is really interesting to see. Let's go check resources. Gameslayer. Gameslayer launched 13 times, and Cubit launched 11. So even with that significant count advantage, Cubit still was launching, like, all the time. And he did get into the off-world much, much faster. So it's interesting to try and see exactly where where Gameslayer's lead was that took him through that game. It may have just been bouncing the hack array a bit more effectively, selling power possibly a bit more effectively than Cubit was. No, power was almost even, and I think Cubit even has a slight edge there. Very, very, very close game. It was just those small edges with, I think, virtual reality and with the off-world markets that kept Gameslayer in it, and just very slightly ahead of Cubit the entire time. And of course, that slightly more expensive stock price from having that HQ level 5 headquarter, while also pulling in more resources from having more claims, that can make the difference. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for game number 3. Let's head on into game number 4.